My dad gave my son a rock in an iPhone box on his birthday and said only good kids get toys. Everyone laughed. But 3 months later, they were crying in court as the judge read the verdict. I remember the exact moment everything changed. Not the slow building resentment that had simmered for decades, or the countless times I'd swallowed my pride and forgiven the unforgivable. No, I'm talking about that precise second when something inside me finally snapped, when the frayed rope of my patience, stretched thin over 37 years, finally broke. It was my son Max's 9th birthday. We were at my parents' house, the same colonial-style home I'd grown up in, with its perfectly manicured lawn and the smell of my mother's lavender potpourri that always made me slightly nauseous. The living room was decorated with half-hearted blue balloons and a wrinkled happy birthday banner that had clearly been reused from some previous celebration. My sister Emily was there with her husband Todd, my mother hovering around with her perpetual anxious smile, and my father, Richard Turner, retired councilman and self-proclaimed patriarch of our family, sitting in his usual leather armchair like it was a throne. Max was excited despite the lackluster decorations. 9 years old and still believing in the magic of birthdays, still trusting that the adults in his life would treat this day as special. His eyes were bright, his smile genuine. He'd been talking about this day for weeks. Not because he expected lavish gifts, Max had never been that kind of kid, but because birthdays in our family were supposedly important. Family traditions matter, my father always said, though what he really meant was that these gatherings gave him an audience. Go on, open it, buddy. Dad's voice rang out with exaggerated cheer as he slid the white apple box across the table toward Max. The whole living room fell quiet, eyes locked on the box like it held something magical. Max was beaming, his chubby fingers trembling slightly as he peeled back the wrapping paper. Is it really an iPhone? He whispered, his voice tight with awe. Open it and see, Dad said, smirking at me over his coffee mug. I should have known. God, I should have known. Max lifted the lid, and his smile froze. Inside the pristine white iPhone box was a jagged rock, just a rock. A stupid, dirty rock that looked like it had been yanked from the edge of someone's driveway. Max blinked at it, clearly confused. Is this a joke? He asked, his voice small and uncertain. Dad leaned back in his chair, laughing loud enough to fill the room. Well, he said, taking a sip of coffee like a man who just nailed the punchline of a great joke, only good boys get toys, isn't that right, Max? There was a beat of stunned silence, then the room erupted with laughter. My sister Emily cackled so hard she had to dab her eyes with a napkin. Her husband Todd snorted into his drink. Even my own mother shook her head and chuckled, that familiar nervous laugh that always emerged when she was uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict my father. I didn't laugh. Max didn't either. He was still staring at the rock, and slowly I saw it register, the heat in his cheeks, the way his shoulders sank. He shoved the box away, not saying a word, just bit his lip and looked at me. I recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same one I used to wear when I was his age, the same look I wore when Dad used to do this exact same thing to me. Oh, come on, Dad waved a hand, pretending to soften. It's just a bit of fun, lighten up. Yeah, lighten up, Emily chimed in, nudging Max's shoulder with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. It's not like it's your real present. My jaw clenched because I knew there wasn't a real present. This was it, the grand gesture, a rock in an iPhone box and a punchline at a kid's expense. Wow, I said quietly, you really outdid yourself this time, Dad. Dad shrugged like this was all perfectly normal. Maybe next year he'll learn some respect, then we'll see about the iPhone, huh? That was it. That was the moment something shifted in me. I glanced at Max again, his head down, eyes wet but refusing to cry, and I felt something boiling low in my chest, something that had been building for years. No more. I looked around the room at my smug father, at the relatives giggling behind their wine glasses, at the people who watched a kid get humiliated and thought it was entertainment. They didn't know what was coming, but they would. Oh, they definitely would. I wish I could say this was new, that my father humiliating a child, my child, was some strange anomaly, but no. This was vintage Richard Turner, same routine, different generation. You see, growing up, he never hit me. No, he was far too proud for that. His abuse wore a suit and tie. It came with sarcasm dressed up as fatherly wisdom, shame wrapped in tradition, and love that always came with a price tag. I was 7 when I first remember it happening. I'd come home from school, bursting with excitement because I'd gotten an A on my science project. I'd stayed up late for a week working on it, cutting out pictures of planets, carefully coloring each one, memorizing facts about the solar system. When I showed him the paper, his eyes scanned it briefly. A minus? he'd said, raising an eyebrow. What happened to the plus? Just like that, my pride withered. He'd taken my small victory and crushed it with 5 words. You're not like your brother, he'd say when I brought home a B instead of an A. He's sharp. Well, you try. That counts for something. My brother. Dead at 19 in a car accident before I was even born, but somehow still the measuring stick for every achievement in my life. A ghost I could never compete with, a standard I could never meet. Remember when Jake won the regional spelling bee? He'd say at dinner parties, ignoring the fact that I'd just made honor roll. Now that was a smart kid. I spent years trying to earn his approval. Got a scholarship, took on 3 jobs, built a company from scratch, and still he called me lucky instead of smart, decent instead of driven. Every Christmas, every birthday, every family gathering was a chance for him to remind me that no matter what I achieved, I was still the disappointment of the family. And when I had Max, that should have changed things. It didn't. My dad barely acknowledged him, never remembered his birthday, never asked how he was doing in school, and when he did speak to him, it was always some backhanded remark. Don't you think it's time to toughen him up? He said once when Max cried over a scraped knee. You cuddle him too much. Cuddle? I was raising my son not to become him, and that was apparently a crime. Emily was no better. As a child, she'd been Dad's princess, spared the worst of his criticism but trained to echo it. She became a therapist, of all things, yet somehow never applied her supposed insights into human behavior to our family dynamics. She'd sit there, sipping her wine, watching Dad tear into me or Max, and sometimes even join in, as if performing for his approval. My mother was a silent participant in all of this, a woman who had long ago surrendered her voice to keep the peace. That's just how he shows he cares, she'd whisper after particularly brutal comments. He wants you to be your best. But here's the thing about being constantly told you're not good enough. Eventually, you either break or you build a fortress around yourself. I built walls. Thick, high walls that protected me from the worst of his barbs. I went to college, started my own business, married, and had Max. I created distance, limited visits, controlled the narrative as best I could. When Max's mother left us, couldn't handle the family baggage, she said, I doubled down on being the father I never had. Supportive. Kind. Present. I was determined that Max would never feel the way I did growing up, never question his worth or have to earn love that should be unconditional. But family has a way of pulling you back in. He's getting older, my mother would say on the phone. Don't you want Max to know his grandfather before it's too late? So we'd visit, carefully, for holidays and occasional birthdays. I'd prep Max beforehand, subtle warnings wrapped in explanations. Grandpa has a different way of showing love, I'd tell him. Sometimes he makes jokes that aren't really funny. It's not about you, okay? I thought I was managing it, creating enough of a buffer that Max could have some kind of relationship with his grandparents without absorbing the damage. I was wrong. So when he handed Max a rock in an iPhone box and laughed in his face, something inside me snapped. You know, I said, standing up slowly after seeing that wounded look in Max's eyes, it's funny because you've spent your whole life convincing people you're the strong one, the patriarch, the backbone of this family, but really all you've ever been is a coward in a cardigan. The laughter stopped. My mom's eyes widened. Emily choked on her wine. Dad leaned back in his chair, squinting at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Watch your mouth, he warned, his voice dropping to that dangerous low tone I knew so well. No, you watch yours, I said, stepping forward. You just humiliated my son in front of the entire family, and for what? A laugh? A little moment of control to feel like a man again? I was joking, for God's sake. You weren't joking. You were performing, like always. You do this every time you find someone weaker, someone younger, someone who trusts you, and you crush them with a smile on your face. Max was still quiet, his little hand gripping the side of his chair. I looked at him, then turned back to the room. You all saw it, every single one of you, and you laughed. Silence filled the room like thick smoke. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Todd suddenly found the carpet fascinating. Mom fiddled with her necklace, eyes darting between me and Dad. I smiled, but there was nothing kind in it. You want to know what's really funny? I actually brought him an iPhone, the real one. It's in the car. I wanted Dad to have his moment, so I waited. Gasps rippled through the room. That's right. I was going to let him hand it over, thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally act like a grandfather. I turned to my sister. But you laughed, Emily. You laughed like it was a comedy show. You, the therapist, you should know better. Todd shifted uncomfortably. He always stayed out of things, neutral like Switzerland, but tonight the air was too thick even for him. My mom tried to cut in. Can we not do this now? It's Max's birthday. Exactly, I snapped, and you all ruined it. I walked out, not even grabbing my coat, just headed to the car, pulled out the actual iPhone box, and walked back in. I handed it to Max. This is for you, from me, because you are a good boy, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. He blinked up at me. Thanks, Dad. His voice cracked on the last word, and I nearly broke right there. Then I turned to the room. You had your show, now it's my turn. I pulled out the envelope from my back pocket and dropped it on the table. What's this? Dad asked, eyeing it like it was a bomb. It's the updated power of attorney paperwork. You're not on it anymore. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the house you co-signed on but haven't paid a cent toward, the accounts you've been helping manage for Max's college fund. It's done. All of it. You can't just. I can, and I did. My sister's husband looked at her, confused. Wait, what accounts? Her face turned pale. I saw the flicker of panic bloom behind her eyes. Yeah, I said, maybe someone should have told you who's been dipping into the family trust behind your back. Be quiet, Emily hissed. No, I said, calm and deadly, you be quiet. The room was no longer laughing, and I was just getting started. Dad's hand hovered over the envelope like it was radioactive. His jaw clenched, but he didn't open it because deep down he knew, he always knows when he's caught. You're making a mistake, he said through gritted teeth. This isn't how families solve problems. No, I replied, ice cold, this is how men solve problems when their family treats their child like garbage. I turned to Emily. Let's talk about that emergency withdrawal from Max's college fund. You told the bank you had my authorization. She froze. I needed it for Ellie's therapy. Ellie was her daughter, my niece, a 13-year-old who barely acknowledged my existence except to roll her eyes whenever I spoke. No, you needed it for your Bali yoga retreat. You posted the whole thing on Instagram, healing my inner child on the beach. Cute caption, paid for by my actual child's education. Her husband shot up from the couch. Wait, you took money from Max's account? She tried to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. $2,200 gone. You forged my signature and claimed it was approved. I have the bank report. The teller even remembered you, said you smiled the whole time. You're overreacting, she barked, voice cracking. It's not like I drained it. You stole from my kid. Don't stand there and act like it was a misunderstanding. Now Mom tried to step in, eyes glistening with manufactured tears. This is getting out of hand. No, Mom, what's out of hand is the fact that Dad has been using Max's social security number to open credit lines since he was 5. The silence was deafening. Even Emily sat down. My mother looked at my father. What is he talking about? I dropped a manila folder on the table. 3 credit cards, all with small limits, all maxed, all opened under Max's name with his SSN and your address. Dad's face went ghost white. You can't prove that. Already did. The bank was very helpful when they realized it was a minor's identity being used. You're going to get a nice letter soon. Might want to clear your schedule. I raised you, he said, low and shaky, and I trusted you. I snapped. But you used my son to protect your pathetic credit score. You played grandfather of the year while financially strangling a 9-year-old. Mom sat down hard in her chair. You've gone too far. No, I said, voice like steel, you all did. Years of silent dinners where I was the butt of the joke, years of being not as smart as Emily or not as charming as Jake, years of paying for Christmas gifts you took credit for, covering tuition for a niece who called me boring behind my back, paying your property taxes just so you could go on cruises. I turned to everyone. And I did it. I did everything not because you deserved it, but because I hoped, just once, you'd see me. You'd look at Max and think, he's better than we were, but instead you pulled him into the same toxic spiral I grew up in. Dad finally exploded. You selfish, bitter little man. You want to destroy this family because of a stupid rock in a box. I laughed. It wasn't pretty, it was feral. No, I'm destroying the illusion. This family was broken a long time ago. I'm just turning the lights on. I pulled out my phone. What are you doing now? Mom asked, already panicking. Sending a copy of this folder to the attorney I hired last week, also ceasing the fraud division of the bank. Oh, and Child Protective Services, just in case someone needs to ask why my kid's identity was being exploited. Emily shot up again. You're insane. I looked right at her. No, I'm just done. Max stood next to me now, the real iPhone in his hand, still unopened. He reached up and took my hand. Can we go, Dad? God, I almost broke. His voice was so calm, so trusting. I nodded. As we walked to the door, Dad's voice rang out, desperate now. If you walk out of here, don't come back. I stopped, turned around. You already made that choice the second you laughed at my son. Then I looked at the others, Emily, Todd, my mother. I'm not your punching bag, I'm not your backup wallet, and I'm not your scapegoat. I'm his father, and that's the only title I care about. And we left, the door shut behind us with a dull thud, the silence inside that house probably still ringing. But out in the driveway, under the cold gray sky, my son looked up at me and said something I'll never forget. I'm glad you're my dad. I hugged him tight, trying to hide the tears that suddenly stung my eyes. I'm glad you're my son, buddy. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. The very next morning, I got a text from my sister. You went too far. Dad's furious. Mom hasn't stopped crying. I stared at the message, feeling nothing but a strange sort of calm. For years, I'd have immediately felt that familiar guilt creeping in, the voice in my head saying I'd overreacted, that I needed to apologize to keep the peace. Not anymore. I didn't reply. By noon, my inbox pinged. It was from the fraud department at the bank. The investigation was officially open. By 3 p.m., I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Turner, this is Detective Amanda Ross with the Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to schedule a formal statement regarding the identity theft of your son. Boom. They thought I'd simmer down. They thought I'd let it slide, but no. This time I wasn't swallowing the pain. I was turning it into ammunition. Yes, I'd be happy to come in tomorrow morning, I told her, scheduling the appointment while Max played with his new iPhone in the next room. I'd helped him set it up that morning, showed him how to take photos, download games. His face had lit up with each new discovery. No rocks, no cruel jokes, just a kid being allowed to enjoy something without strings attached. Max went to bed early that night, emotionally drained from the day's events. I sat alone in the kitchen, a glass of whiskey in front of me, untouched. My phone buzzed again. Emily. Dad says he's going to sue you for slander. You need to retract your accusations now. I almost laughed. Slander requires the statements to be false. Everything I'd said was documented, provable, real. Within 48 hours, I'd filed a police report and submitted every single document I had. The bank statements tied to Max's social security number, screenshots of the forged withdrawal from his college fund, video footage from the birthday party showing exactly what happened when my father humiliated him. I'd been preparing this for weeks, ever since I discovered the first fraudulent credit card statement. The rock in the box was just the final straw. They laughed at a child. They stole from him, and now we were going to court. The family's silence lasted about a week, then Mom called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was frantic, her words tumbling over each other like she was trying to outrun the truth. Honey, please, let's just fix this internally. Family doesn't go to court over mistakes. Your father's not well, Emily's a mess. Just come over, let's talk. I didn't even finish listening. That Sunday, I got a formal letter from a lawyer, my father's lawyer. They were threatening to countersue for defamation of character. The audacity almost made me laugh. You can't defame someone who just handed a rock to his grandson and told him he wasn't good enough. I called my own lawyer immediately, a woman named Sarah Jeffries who specialized in financial fraud and family law. She'd come highly recommended by a colleague who'd gone through a bitter divorce. Let them try, she said after reviewing their letter. We have enough evidence to crush them in open court. The following Monday, Max's school called. He'd gotten into a fight with another boy who'd teased him about not having a mom. The old me would have panicked, felt shame, worried about what others would think. The new me just picked him up, took him for ice cream, and listened. I don't care what he said about Mom, Max explained, eyes downcast. But then he said I was a loser like you, and I got mad. My heart squeezed. Who said I was a loser? Max hesitated. Aunt Emily told Ellie that you've always been a loser, and I guess Ellie told her friends, and then Jake told me at recess. I nodded slowly, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. You know that's not true, right? He looked up at me, chocolate ice cream smeared on his chin. I know. That's why I hit him. Well, hitting isn't the answer, I said, handing him a napkin. But standing up for yourself is. Like you did at Grandpa's house? I paused, understanding the weight of the moment. Yes, but with words, not fists. I should have stood up for both of us a long time ago. The trial was scheduled for mid-June, civil court. Fraud, identity theft, misuse of minors' information. But I wasn't just after justice, I wanted the truth on public record. The first court day was packed. Emily looked like a ghost, dressed in somber gray as if attending a funeral, her husband a step behind her like a reluctant shadow. Dad showed up in his best blazer, still trying to control the narrative with a forced calm. Mom wore sunglasses indoors, classic drama. Their lawyer, a slick guy named Gerald Hamilton, tried to paint it as a family misunderstanding. "Mr. Turner," he said with a practiced smile during his opening statement, "don't you think this has gone too far? Family disagreements should be resolved at home, not aired in public like dirty laundry." When it was my turn to testify, I leaned forward, making sure my voice was clear, controlled, cold, deadly. My son's name and future were used like currency by people who laughed in his face. "You're right, it has gone too far. That's why I'm here." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Martha Collins, nodded. "Let's proceed." We did, and it was glorious. Day 2, my lawyer presented the financial evidence, credit card statements in Max's name, loan applications with forged signatures, bank transfers that my father had authorized using my power of attorney, which was supposed to be limited to emergencies. Day 3, the banker who handled the forged withdrawal testified. He described how Emily had come in, claiming to be authorized to make the withdrawal for emergency medical expenses for her nephew, Max. In reality, the money had been transferred to her personal account and spent within days on a yoga retreat in Bali, complete with Instagram posts that my lawyer projected onto a screen in the courtroom. #findingmyself, #so-blessed, #healing-journey. Emily's face crumpled as her own posts were used against her. She tried to claim I had given verbal permission. I had audio recordings proving otherwise, a phone call where she'd asked to borrow money, and I'd explicitly said no. "You recorded me?" she gasped when the audio was played. "I recorded all financial discussions after I found the first unauthorized withdrawal," I replied calmly. "One-party consent state." She folded on the stand, tried to cry. The judge wasn't impressed. And then came Dad's moment under oath. He sat in the witness box, still trying to maintain that air of dignity, of authority, that had cowed me for so many years. But under the fluorescent court lights, he just looked old, diminished. "Did you open credit cards using your grandson's information?" my lawyer asked. He hesitated. "I don't recall." Wrong answer, because the bank had already confirmed his phone number was used during the verification calls, his signature matched, his address was on all the statements. And then I dropped the bombshell, a recorded voicemail he'd left me just 3 weeks earlier, when I'd first confronted him about the credit cards. "It's just some cards, for God's sake." His voice rang out in the courtroom. "He's a kid, he's not going to use the credit. What's the big deal? We all take care of each other in this family. Besides, my credit's shot because I co-signed your house. You owe me." The courtroom was silent. Even my mother looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. In the end, the judge's verdict was swift and brutal. Emily was ordered to repay $2,200 to Max's college fund plus fines and legal fees. My father was fined $10,000, placed under investigation for elder fraud on top of identity theft, and the judge recommended the case be forwarded to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. I was awarded $25,000 in damages, but more importantly, the court sealed Max's credit. He was safe, and every person in that courtroom saw who my family really was. As we walked out of the courthouse, Emily chased me down the steps. "You've destroyed this family," she hissed, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. "Do you realize what you've done?" I turned to her, calm still, powerful. "No, you destroyed it. I just exposed the rubble." She didn't respond, just stood there blinking like a light about to go out. Max looked up at me. "Are we done, Dad?" I smiled, almost. But just one last thing. I took him to the Apple store that night, let him pick out his own AirPods and a case for his iPhone. "It's not about the stuff," he whispered as we walked out, new purchases in hand. "I know," I said, putting my arm around him. "It's about respect." He nodded, understanding far more than a 9-year-old should have too. "And love, right? Real love doesn't come with rocks." "No, buddy," I said, my throat tight. "Real love doesn't come with rocks." It had been 3 months since the courtroom fallout. I thought it would be quiet after that, peaceful, a new beginning. I was wrong. At first, things were calm. I focused on Max, on building a real life. I set up a new college fund under lock and key, took him to Aikido classes twice a week, started reading with him every night. He laughed more, slept better. The tension in his shoulders, the one I knew all too well from my own childhood, was gone. But ghosts have a way of clawing back. The first crack came from my mother. She called at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I saw her name flash across my screen and immediately knew something was wrong. After weeks of silence, she wouldn't call this early unless it was important. I picked up. "Your father's in the hospital," she said, voice trembling. "Heart attack. They say he needs a bypass procedure. We can't afford it. The court took too much. Please, he's asking for you, for Max." I said nothing, listening to her ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "He regrets it," she whispered. "Please, just come see him." I hung up without responding, a hollow feeling in my chest. I didn't doubt the heart attack was real. My father had been battling high blood pressure for years, and the stress of the court case couldn't have helped. But the timing was suspicious, and the immediate leap to asking for money felt calculated. A week later, I received a letter from my aunt, one of the few relatives who had stayed out of the mess. Inside was a clipping from the local newspaper. Longtime Councilman Richard Turner hospitalized after cardiac complications. Family now struggling financially after recent legal issues. Below was a GoFundMe link. Goal, $40,000. Raised, $3,200. I pulled up the page on my phone. There was a photo of my father in his hospital bed, looking frail and defeated. The description painted him as a devoted public servant fallen on hard times, a grandfather yearning to make amends. The comments section was filled with sympathy and prayers. Top comment, "Hope the son finds it in his heart to forgive." Donation from Emily Turner. $10. "I hope he gets a second chance as a father, as a grandfather." Pathetic. $10 from his own daughter, who'd stolen thousands from her nephew. It was all for show, a public performance of virtue that matched nothing in their actual behavior. Days later, another call, unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. It was my father. "Hey son," the voice was frail, broken. "I don't sleep anymore. I think about it, about what I did to Max, the rock, the way he looked. His eyes. I thought I was being funny. Turns out I was being cruel, just like I've always been." Silence stretched between us. I could hear the beeping of hospital machines in the background. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he continued, "but if you ever showed up, I'd know it's not over, that maybe I still have a chance." I took a breath, steadying myself. "Max made a custom phone case at school," I said. "It says, 'Only good boys get toys.'" That's good," he said weakly. I asked him what it meant. He said, "It means bad grandpas don't have grandsons anymore." I hung up, my hand shaking slightly. I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected, just emptiness where anger had once burned. I didn't call back. A week later, I found myself in the old neighborhood, the same strip mall where we'd once gathered for Max's infamous birthday prank. I had to pick up a prescription at the pharmacy there, a mundane errand that suddenly put me back in their world. I saw them, my family, what was left of it. Dad in a wheelchair, looking gaunt, Mom beside him, Emily handing out flyers. "Help Richard Turner. Family matters most." I watched from across the parking lot. Emily noticed me first. Her smile flickered, a mix of surprise and hope. She jogged toward me. "You came," she said breathlessly. "I knew you weren't as cold as you pretended." I said nothing, just looked at her, at the flyers in her hand. "We were wrong, all of us, but we're still family," she continued, glancing back at our parents. Dad was trying to stand, leaning on the wheelchair for support. "No," I said, "we were a cult where love was conditional and money was currency, and now the God you worshipped, status, control, image, has failed." She blinked, stunned. "This isn't about money." "Then why does your flyer have a QR code and not an apology?" She flinched. I turned around and walked to the car. Max was in the passenger seat, waiting. When Emily caught sight of him, she raised her hand to wave. He didn't wave back, didn't even blink, just looked at her like she was another stranger in the crowd. That was the moment I realized Max had learned faster than I ever did. The lesson of conditional love, of transactional relationships, of emotional manipulation, he'd absorbed it all and chosen a different path. We drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw Dad trying to stand, his hand reaching out like he could pull me back in time, but I was already gone. That night, Max and I sat in our tiny living room with popcorn and a movie, some superhero film he'd been wanting to see. The mundane normalcy of it felt sacred after everything we'd been through. "Do you miss them?" I asked during a quiet moment. He thought for a second, biting his lower lip the way he did when considering a serious question. "I miss who they could have been," he said finally, "but I'm glad I've got you." I felt a lump in my throat. He rested his head on my shoulder, his thin body warm against my side. I put my arm around him and closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the disappointment, wasn't the failure, wasn't the loser. I was the dad who showed up, the one who said enough, the one who finally broke the cycle. The next morning, Max surprised me by coming down to breakfast wearing a t-shirt he'd decorated himself. Across the front, in wobbly marker, he'd written "Good kid, real toys." On the back, "No rocks allowed." I laughed, genuinely laughed, for what felt like the first time in months. "You made that yourself?" He nodded, grinning. "For our new family rule." "Our new family rule?" "Yeah. No rocks in boxes. No mean jokes. And nobody gets to use our names for credit cards." I nodded solemnly. "Those are excellent rules." He took a bite of cereal, then looked up at me with milk dripping down his chin. "And one more rule," he said. "We have to help each other remember that we're not what Grandpa says we are." I nodded, swallowing hard against the emotion rising in my throat. "That's the most important rule of all." 2 weeks later, I got another call from the hospital. My father had suffered a second, more severe heart attack. This time, I did go, not because I'd forgiven him, but because I needed to say my own piece, face to face. When I walked into the hospital room, my mother was there, holding his hand. She gasped when she saw me, tears immediately welling in her eyes. "You came," she whispered, like it was a miracle. My father looked so small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped steadily. His eyes fluttered open when he heard my voice. "Where's Max?" he rasped, looking past me toward the door. "At school," I said. "Where he belongs." A flicker of disappointment crossed his face. I thought you'd bring him." "Why would I?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and even. "So you could give him another rock? Use his social security number again? Teach him that love is something to be earned through humiliation?" Mom started to protest, but Dad held up a weak hand to stop her. "You're right," he said, surprising me. "You're right." I sat in the chair across from my mother, maintaining a careful distance from the bed. "I didn't come to fight. I came to tell you that I'm moving on. Max and I are moving to Portland next month. I got an offer from a company there, and we're taking it." "Portland?" my mother echoed, sounding stricken. "But that's so far away." "That's the point," I said. "We need a fresh start, away from all of this." My father's monitor beeped a little faster. "You're punishing me," he said, his voice strained. "Taking my grandson away when I'm dying." I looked at him directly. "This isn't about punishment. It's about protection, for Max and for me. And let's be honest, you never showed much interest in being his grandfather before." "People change," he insisted. "Near-death experiences change you." "Maybe," I conceded. "But some damage can't be undone. And I won't risk him experiencing any more of it." I stood to leave, having said what I came to say, but my father called out as I reached the door. "I was wrong," he said, his voice breaking. "About everything. Jake wasn't perfect. I couldn't face losing him. It was easier to idolize him than to grieve him. And it was easier to find fault with you than to admit I was failing as a father." I turned back, studying his face. For the first time in my life, I saw no performance there, no calculation, just a broken old man facing his mistakes too late. "I hope you find peace," I said quietly. "I really do. But Max and I need to find ours, too." I left the hospital feeling lighter somehow, as if setting firm boundaries had freed me from invisible chains I'd been carrying for decades. Portland welcomed us with rain and possibilities. We found a small house with a backyard where Max could play, close to a good school and a park. When I told him we were moving, he'd asked only one question: "Will they find us there?" "No," I'd promised. "We're starting over." And we did. I set up my home office, started the new job remotely while Max finished out his school year online. We planted a garden, adopted a shelter dog, a goofy mutt with one floppy ear that Max named Rocket, and slowly, carefully, built a life that felt secure. 3 months after we moved, I received word that my father had passed away. The news came via email from a cousin, not my mother or sister. The funeral was scheduled for the following week. "Are we going back?" Max asked when I told him, his face serious. I considered it carefully. Do you want to? He thought about it, petting Rocket absently. No, he said finally. But I think you might need to. Sometimes that kid's wisdom floored me. He was right, I needed closure, needed to put the final period on that chapter of my life. You'd stay with Mrs. Wilson next door, I said. It would just be for 2 days. He nodded. I know. I'll be okay, Dad. I flew back alone, rented a car at the airport, and drove straight to the funeral home. I arrived just as the service was starting, slipping into a back row while someone I didn't recognize was delivering a eulogy full of half-truths about Richard Turner's generosity and integrity. Emily spotted me midway through the service, her eyes widening. She looked thinner, tired, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. My mother sat in the front row, shoulders hunched, a tissue clutched in her hand. I didn't approach them, didn't sign the guest book, didn't join the procession to the cemetery. I'd come to witness, not to participate in another performance. Later, at the reception, Emily cornered me by the refreshment table. You didn't bring Max, she accused, voice low. No. Mom's heartbroken. She lost Dad, and now she's lost her only grandson too. I looked at her directly. She lost Max the day everyone laughed at him getting a rock for his birthday. And she lost me long before that. Emily's face crumpled slightly. I'm trying to make amends, she said. I've been in therapy, real therapy, not just going through the motions. I paid back the money, with interest. I know. The bank notified me. Then why? Because making amends isn't just about repaying money, Emily. It's about acknowledging the harm you caused and showing through consistent actions that you've changed. One payment and a few therapy sessions don't erase years of behavior. She nodded slowly. I understand that now. I do. She hesitated, then added, things have been hard. Todd left. Said he couldn't believe he'd married someone who would steal from a child. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then I remembered Max's face when he opened that iPhone box and found a rock. Actions have consequences, I said simply. Can I at least have your address? She asked. To send Christmas cards, birthday gifts for Max? I shook my head. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not now. Before leaving, I did speak briefly with my mother. She clung to my arm, begging me to bring Max to visit. He's all I have left, she wept. He's not yours, I said gently but firmly. He's not a possession or a do-over. He's a child who deserves better than what this family offered him. I love him, she insisted. Then respect the boundaries that keep him safe and healthy, I replied. That's what real love looks like. I flew back to Portland the next morning, feeling strangely at peace. The funeral hadn't been about saying goodbye to my father, I'd already done that in the hospital. It was about saying goodbye to the version of myself that had been desperate for his approval, that had accepted crumbs of affection as if they were feasts. When I walked through our front door, Max and Rocket barreled into me, a tangle of boy and dog limbs and excited voices. Did you see them? Were they sad? Did they ask about me? Max fired questions rapid fire as I set down my bag. Yes, and yes, I answered, ruffling his hair. But more importantly, what did you and Mrs. Wilson do while I was gone? He launched into a detailed account of backyard camping and making s'mores, the funeral already forgotten in the excitement of his adventure. Later that night, as I tucked him into bed, he grew serious again. Dad? Now that Grandpa's gone, will Mom try to come back? The question caught me off guard. Max rarely spoke about his mother, who had left when he was 4 with vague promises to find herself and sporadic phone calls that dwindled to nothing within a year. I don't think so, buddy, I said honestly. But even if she did, nothing would change between you and me. We're a team, remember? He nodded, visibly relieved. The best team. The very best, I agreed, turning off his bedside lamp. Good night, Max. Night, Dad. I love you. Love you too, kiddo. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, a thick manila package with a Portland postmark. Inside was a custom-bound book titled The Rock in the Box, a story about growing up Turner. I'd spent 6 months writing it, working with a therapist to process my childhood and my relationship with my father in a way that might help others recognize the signs of emotional abuse. I'd sent copies to my mother and Emily, not as an olive branch, but as a final statement. This is what happened. This is the truth. This is why we had to leave. I didn't expect a response, but a week later, a letter came from my mother, handwritten on the stationery she'd used for as long as I could remember. I've read your book 3 times, she wrote. The first time, I was angry and hurt. The second time, I cried for the little boy you were and the father I allowed to damage you. The third time, I finally understood why you had to take Max away. I won't ask to see him again. That has to be his choice when he's older. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for that terrible birthday, but for every time I stood by and let your father crush your spirit. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your book opened my eyes, and maybe it will help other mothers see what I was blind to for so long. I showed the letter to my therapist at our next session. Do you believe her? Dr. Kaplan asked. I considered it carefully. I think she believes herself. Whether she'd actually behave differently if given the chance, I don't know. And how do you feel about that uncertainty? Okay, actually, I realized. Her recognition doesn't change my path. It's not validation I need anymore. And it was true. The desperate need for parental approval that had driven so many of my choices, that had kept me tethered to toxic relationships, that had allowed the abuse to continue into the next generation, had finally loosened its grip. Max had just turned 10, taller now, more confident. He had friends at his new school, played soccer on Saturdays, still kept that custom phone case with its defiant message. We'd started a tradition of real birthday celebrations focused on experiences rather than presents, although there were always a few thoughtfully chosen gifts, none of them containing rocks. For his 10th birthday, we went camping in the Cascade Mountains, just the two of us plus Rocket. Sitting by the campfire that night, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky, Max suddenly asked, "Do you think we'll ever see them again? Grandma and Aunt Emily?" I poked the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "Would you want to?" He considered it, face serious in the firelight. "Maybe someday. When I'm bigger. If they promise not to be mean." I nodded. "That's fair. It would be your choice, when you're ready." He smiled, satisfied, then moved on to asking if we could make more s'mores. Just like that, no dwelling in the past, no fear clouding his future. Later, as he slept in the tent, I sat alone by the dying embers of our fire, thinking about cycles broken and new paths forged. My father had given my son a rock in an iPhone box, thinking it was just a cruel joke. He couldn't have known it would be the catalyst that finally freed us both. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a photo I'd kept from before, Max on his 8th birthday, smile strained, eyes uncertain, always looking for the catch, the condition, the price of love. Then I swiped to a recent picture, Max in midair jumping into a lake, joy radiating from every inch of him, unafraid and unguarded. The difference was everything. It was every hard boundary enforced, every difficult truth spoken, every time I'd chosen his well-being over family obligation. It was proof that the damage didn't have to be perpetual, that patterns could be broken. I'd lost a family, yes. But Max and we'd built something better. Something real. No rocks. No conditions. No cruel jokes disguised as love. Just a father and son, writing a new story together. And in that moment, watching the stars while my son slept peacefully nearby, I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't lost anything worth keeping after all.